Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Foundations of Business. I hope you're all doing well, staying safe, and enjoying the summer so far. We are going to review Chapter 3 today. I'm going to do it in two different sections. As you realized in the readings, and obviously referenced it even in the module, there's a lot of information within Chapter 3. So we intentionally break it up just to have a little bit more time to absorb the information and reflect on the information. So we're going to review the first part of Chapter 3 today. Chapter 3 is kind of an introduction into economics and connecting the dots between economics and business, and even sometimes what I refer to as a "so what, who cares" moments, and we'll obviously try to answer some of that as well. So go ahead and get started. Before we get too far, just from the calendar calibration and looking ahead, we're marching towards your exam, which is Friday, June the 3rd. So we still have two more chapters, Chapter 3, Chapter 5. So the economics and the global business. You can see there the global business, that is on Thursday. The goal is you'll have the video before that. So hopefully you'll have your video available by Tuesday, so that you can actually work a little bit ahead for those that like to work ahead. There'll be a review session as well that will be available by Thursday, and then your exam is on Friday, and that's chapters 1 through 5. Monday the 6th is an asynchronous. You work on academic planning, and there's a library research module for you to work on, and then we move into the third, the next third of the course, and that's the forms of business ownership with Chapter 6. Okay, so real quick, LinkedIn. Most of you have submitted your LinkedIn profiles. I've enjoyed looking at most of them. Some of you did not turn it in. It's unfortunate because, you're going to lose 10% per day and up to a 0. So unfortunate for those that did not turn it in. For those that did, just some general feedback. Some of you that are, in your second, third years, you can tell the maturity of your profile, which I think is great. You have a number of followers. As I mentioned, I do think it is a good time. I realize, hey, I don't have to build my LinkedIn. I already have one. Let me just submit that one. That's great. I still think that it would be good to take 20 or 30 minutes, work on updating it, making the appropriate changes. Some of you have profile pictures, some of you don't. That certainly is an option. You don't have to have a profile picture. If you do have a profile picture, it needs to be as professional as possible. So again, for those that have had LinkedIn for a while, easy grade for you, but I still think it would have been a good time for you to update. For those of you that built it, I went ahead and gave you a completion grade, certainly there, but I challenge you to work on it. I realize it is the summertime, but certainly look at the resources that we gave you there. Any type of job or employment that you've had. I've been working since I was 14. They were retail, but it showed initiative, it showed commitment, it showed leadership. And so I would encourage you to do that. Some of you just had Virginia Tech. You didn't even have which college, which major that you were working on. I know Virginia Tech, and I know our students, based on your LinkedIn profiles, no one is a member of any organization on campus. I know better than that. So again, I realized this was maybe check the box, get the assignment done, turn it in. So I get that, but I would strongly encourage you to spend time on this. Certainly will help you at any of the career fairs for Pamplin students, Business Horizons. I know the other colleges have career fairs too, and many recruiters obviously utilize LinkedIn and Handshake. So you have to do maintenance on these types of profiles and systems. Learning objectives, we've got a lot to cover. There's quite a bit of terminology in this particular chapter. You can see explaining key terms and differences here. So certainly spending the time. So Economics, we actually have some economic majors in the classroom, but as you found out from the readings, economics is the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. We learned in the previous chapters about goods being tangible and intangible. We know services, and then we know revenue and costs. But right now we're going to sort of understand what resources are needed. You can see here land, labor, and capital, which is sort of the original thoughts on resources. Textbook gets into entrepreneurship, certainly the practice of and the investment of, and leading to more economic development through entrepreneurship. And knowledge itself is certainly a resource. But you're at a university to gain what? And that is more knowledge. We know that certainly the areas of continuous improvement and lifelong learning, those skills and skill set gained and the knowledge gained certainly helps create economic development and wealth. This is the chart from the textbook. And so you can see how businesses and households are connected, both through inputs and outputs, land, labor, capital, land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurship kind of being shared by both households and businesses. We know, put yourself in the situation of a consumer, that being of a household, buying products from various firms. And then businesses are there to produce and sell those products, and the outputs then are goods and services. And you can see the relation, the circular relationship, the dependency on both sides of the market dynamics. We're going to talk about some different economic systems in this particular chapter. We're on the far left-hand side where we have pure communism, all the way over to the far right-hand side of a pure free market or capitalism. This is usually where a student, sometimes either before class or during class, will say, well, Mr. Pomp, I thought the US was a pure capitalist nation. So through the discussion and certainly through the readings that you had, that you probably have realized that we're more of a mixed economic system, and you can see that in the center there of the economic spectrum. We know that Adam Smith, sort of the profound father of economics, he had some key points, obviously, where freedom was central, being vital to the economy's survival. Certainly the freedom to keep profits, for businesses, and the investment back into society, that people would work hard and they would be rewarded for working hard, freedom to own land and property. And, this is, obviously from the 18th century, still holds true for most or for many nations today. Government's role in business, I come from more of the moderate, limited government standpoint, but there certainly is a role that government can play in business, and that can come in many, many different ways. We talked a little bit, in chapter 4 in the ethics chapter about corruption and, having laws and regulations, knowing between right and wrong, and certainly government can promote businesses by minimizing corruption. There's lots of laws and regulations, and even just cultural norms that should minimize corruption. Minimizing spending and keeping taxes and regulations to a minimum is kind of where I fall into place. And sometimes it's difficult. I mean, over the last couple of years, the word unprecedented has been used many, many times, but the economic conditions that we found ourselves in, due to the shutdown of COVID, and that has certainly had to change the mindset of many people with regards to spending and taxes, allowing private ownership of businesses, passing laws so that business people can enforce contracts. That's an important piece. Minimizing the interference with free exchange of goods and services. This is why we have a U.S. Navy, keeping the seas open and free from conflict and that kind of piece, but also passing good trade agreements, or negotiating good trade agreements with various countries to help with the exchange of goods and services. We've kind of already talked a little bit here about the three different economic systems, capitalism, socialism, and communism. We're going to jump in real quick to capitalism. Certainly we can recognize this. We've studied this through K through 12, and now we're here at the university. This is, again, land, factories, and stores are owned by individuals and not the government. And typically most of these, are operated for profit. Some countries with capitalist foundations, not surprisingly, United States, England, Australia, and Canada. I was just in Ireland. I would, certainly add, the Irish community to this list as well. Very strong from a capitalist foundations. The basic rights, this kind of goes back to Adam Smith, right? The right to choice, the freedom of choice, the freedom of competition, the right to own a business and keep all the business's profits, and the right to own private property. So we've reiterated this now 2 or 3 times. So certainly something to keep in mind as an understanding of the foundation of capitalism. Big piece. Number 3 there, sometimes I have some good student discussion, good student engagement about the freedom of competition. I think many of us, kind of human nature, we enjoy competition. We watch sports. We compete in academic case studies. So we have this human nature, this human condition of enjoying competition. And, for businesses, I think it's also a good to have competition. It makes us stronger. It helps us realize, continuous improvement, product development. So I've always enjoyed in business from a competitive standpoint. There's actually Dr. Ginwali within the Department of Management here at the Pamplin College of Business has even written about and has really good research surrounding the co-opetition. So it's cooperation with competitors, with your competition, and that can lead to strategic alliances. It can lead to joint ventures, certainly from a product development standpoint. So there's a lot of really good outcomes based on the freedom of competition. Free markets. Let's talk a little bit about free markets. This is where all of us in this particular consumer environment here in the US is that we actually help to make decisions through our purchasing power or our non-purchasing power about how much should be produced within that particular market. And so consumers send signals. We send signals based on trends. We send signals based on our willingness to or our unwillingness to purchase certain products, either based on price, availability, even down to specific colors of a product, right? And so it's pretty interesting that we have helped to form, for example, Redbox, Netflix. We have helped with the growth of Apple and Quarterback. I say we collectively as a consumer purchasing, consumer buying community. Price, this is where, there's certainly signals and data that can be gathered that tells companies how much of a product they should produce based on price. If something is wanted, the price will rise until more products are available. So it gets into a supply and demand, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Look at gasoline right now. Gas is high here in the summer of 2022. It's probably making decisions on vacations for some people, for some families. They may decide to stay closer to home or even stay home, depending. Used to be I could fill up my car. I have a Hyundai Sonata for $32. Just filled it up the other day for $63. Does that change my decisions? I may not I may not travel as far based on price. So certainly a great example of how consumers and the free market are connected. Socialism, definitely different here. Many of the basic businesses like utilities, the premise here is that they should be owned by the government. And the reason for that premise is that so that the profits can be distributed evenly among the people. In many socialist nations, entrepreneurs run smaller businesses. Yes, there could be free healthcare. Yes, there could be free education. Yes, there could be free many other services. But because of that, citizens are highly taxed. It's part of it. The textbook talked about the relationship between the environment, the poor, the immigrants, and where the government is a little bit more involved. Socialism benefits, you can see here, I mentioned a few already with healthcare and education, childcare, longer vacations, generous sick leave, and others. So this within my career in industry, I think I've mentioned I was based here in Blacksburg with a multinational company, and we had offices in Germany, England, France, Italy, throughout Europe. But our largest offices were in Germany. And when we would sit down at dinners, if they were visiting here or if I was in Europe, and we would just start to share vacations. And so even after 10 years, I had 4 weeks of vacation. A colleague in Germany started the company with 6 weeks of vacation. Typically, our work week was 40 to 45 hours. They had a law that they could not work more than 34 hours per week. Typically, they had half days off on Fridays, or even complete days off on Fridays. So just examples of the US and the culture from a business and industry standpoint as compared to, Germany or other parts of Europe. There's definitely some negatives of socialism, one that being the brain drain. And so many times, if you look at doctors, lawyers, or business owners, they realize that their taxes are high. In some cases, their knowledge is not being valued in a profit distribution standpoint. And so many of them will leave, and that's why that's why it's referred to as brain drain. Many of them will come to the US, Canada, and other more capitalistic countries. In some cases, fewer inventions and innovations because the reward is not as great. And so that certainly has been one of the negative impacts of socialism. You can see here from the textbook some of the socialist countries. Many are former communist countries in Asia and Europe. And so they're kind of moving from the communism over to socialism, especially with the fall of the wall back in 1989. Communism, obviously on the other end of the economic spectrum, this is where almost all of the economic decisions is made by the government. So it's an economic and political system where the government makes almost all of the decisions and owns almost all of the major factors of production. Here, prices don't necessarily reflect demand, including food and clothing. This is where the government can basically control the price versus the market itself. If you look at, the leader of North Korea with Kim, he can artificially set a price, and whether that is good or bad, that's what happens. And so the theory of supply and demand based on price is not effective, obviously, with that. Many communist countries today suffer from fear of the government. The citizens fear the government, and partly because there's just severe economic depression. And what else or where else can they go? Two major economic systems, obviously, the command economies is what the government determines. Free market economies is where the market largely determines. You can see that. Certainly, we're going to talk more about this in chapter 5, is the global culture, or global climate, if you will, the global environment as it pertains to business. Over the last 25 to 30 years, there has been a growth of global competition. When you look at countries like China, Vietnam, India, have all emerged with a large manufacturing base, much of which has been invested by the government. And so you can see this has increased free trade among those. And there's, over the last 25 to 30 years, think about technology and the distribution system and communication advances have all helped to contribute to the global environment, global economy. And there's certainly some mixed economies. This is kind of bringing them together. My favorite word over the last 2 years, and it's used quite frequently, is hybrid. So we could certainly refer to it as a hybrid economy. And this is where, again, some allocation of the resources is made by both the market and some by the government. This is where the U.S. is today. And so, if you look at some of the decisions, even based on, for example, recently with the baby food, baby formula, there's been executive orders to increase production. Okay, so that's the government saying you must, through executive order, increase production. That wasn't necessarily the market, although the market is out. Gas prices sort of being controlled through taxes and even ordering additional supply and things like that. So this is where the countries can use the mix of two economic systems. And there has been an obvious trend to mixed economies. Part of it is capitalist countries looking at more social programs. So since the 20s and 30s, the U.S. has had more social programs. If you think about it, when you call 911, you don't have to pay for the police to come. You don't have to pay for the fire department to come. K through 12, certainly there are private schools that people can choose to go to, but public schools, of which it's either free or low cost to go to. Socialist governments are moving more towards capitalism, partly because they realize that the tax base is too high. And so many companies are not wanting to invest in those types of countries because of the tax burden that's there either for themselves and or their employees. And then communist governments, certainly over the last 100 years are disappearing, not as quickly as I would like, but certainly disappearing. All right, I'm going to stop here. And again, we're splitting this up into two different sections. So that finishes part one of chapter 3. And I will share with you part 2 in just a moment.